Good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for being here. On September 29th, 2015, the United Nations General Assembly established December 9 as the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of Crime, of Genocide, and of the Prevention of this crime. Today, healthcare workers globally have united to join our colleagues in Ramallah, Palestine, to convene press conferences across 4 continents and over 20 cities, demanding an end to this brutal genocide that's been happening in Gaza. Today marks day 429. December 9, 2024, today also marks the 76th anniversary of the 1948 Genocide Convention, which defines and criminalizes genocide. Just a few days ago, Amnesty International said, and I'm quoting, "Our research reveals that for months, Israel has persisted in committing genocidal acts, fully aware of the irreparable harm it was inflicting on the Palestinians in Gaza." The punishment has also been defined, and it's been going on for 429 days with impunity. This comes in wake of at least 52,000 people killed, 17,000 of them being children, 108,000 injured, over 10,000 healthcare workers killed, 1,200 injured. That's not to name and count all the ones who are not identified because they're either under the rubble or all their families have been wiped out, so there is nobody to identify them. Gaza healthcare system is systematically being destroyed through a series of attacks, and we're here to place some demands on our governments. With that, I will leave the microphone to Hala Rahid, who has been a diplomat for US for 18 years and resigned because she would not be complicit with this crime.
Good morning, everybody. How ironic that we stand here today on the commemoration of a day to honor the victims of genocides, when we have all been witnessing for over a year a live stream genocide on our phones. The irony of the fact that the Convention on Genocide Prevention launched in 1948, but yet today, we, as citizens of the world, are not able to stop what is happening. And I can tell you, as someone that served the United States government for 18 years, someone that worked on diplomacy throughout the world on behalf of the United States government, I know why it's happening. It's when seemingly good people do nothing and choose to do nothing. When diplomats know and recognize and affirm that the US government is breaking US laws, is breaking international laws, yet choose to remain silent. So I have to say that it is an absolute honor for me today to be standing next to these heroes behind me and alongside all those around the world that chose to not only use their voice, that chose to use their bodies, their expertise, and actually go to Gaza and help those in need. And the fact that we're seeing such solidarity today in cities around the world gives me faith in humanity. But more needs to be done, because despite all of this solidarity, we're still seeing the ethnic cleansing of an entire population. We're seeing the forced starvation of an entire population. And yet, despite this, arms continue to flow. Now, I want to make one thing clear. We're focused today on international law, and that is absolutely critical because it's very clear on the prevention of genocide. But I want to add one more point, that this is all in violation of US law as well. And the politicians that sit not too far from here in Capitol Hill, they're willingly violating US law, as are members of the Biden-Harris administration. So for clarity, there are a few points that I want to make. There is Leahy law, which states that the US government is not authorized to send any military assistance to countries that commit gross human rights violations. There is ample evidence, not just from international organizations, but from US experts that have been silenced, documenting day after day, week after week, month after month, the gross human rights violations that are being perpetrated by the Israeli army in Gaza. Yet the arms continue to flow. There's also the Foreign Assistance Act, which states that the US government is not authorized to send military assistance to countries that inhibit humanitarian assistance from going to those in need. Yet again, we're seeing the absolute willful violation of this law when there is ample evidence documenting Israel's systematic blocking of humanitarian assistance to the point where the population of Gaza has been starved, malnourished, to the point for some of starvation to death, including children. How is this still happening? And again, I'll go back to the point of it happens because seemingly good people choose to do nothing. So on all those who are listening, watching, feeling helpless, be inspired by all those standing behind me. You don't have to go to Gaza, but use your voice. Call your representatives. Vote these politicians out. Insist that a human life is a human life, whether it's a Palestinian, an Israeli, or anyone else. That children cannot be targeted or considered collateral damage. Now, I'm honored to, on behalf of healthcare workers, list some of their demands. And I hope that all those listening will support these demands in their own right. First and foremost, at the very basic level, global healthcare workers demand an end to Israel's genocide in Gaza, an immediate end. In Washington, D.C., here, the group of healthcare workers are demanding a few very specific and clear-cut demands. A complete arms embargo on Israel. And I'll add, this is in line, again, with US law. There are more that I didn't stipulate, but just the two that I already discussed should make this abundantly clear that it needs to be implemented as soon as possible. Next is this issuing of a statement opposing genocide by the American Medical Association and the American Nurses Association and the American Associations and Academies for Specialties. And when we again say that atrocities continue to happen throughout history, again and again and again, when seemingly good people choose to do nothing, this is an exact example of that. Why hasn't the AMA already made a statement? Why hasn't there been more unity from not just the healthcare profession, but every profession demanding an end to this genocide? Next, the creation and the expansion of a medical evacuation plan to support provision of life-saving medical aid to Palestinians in Gaza. The refunding and enhancing of UNRWA that is critical for humanitarian aid to reach people, the people of Palestine and Gaza, and this is life-saving aid that otherwise has no way of reaching those in need. diplomatic sanctions on the Israeli government and its military officials, again, in line with international law, the recognition of the state of Palestine, and the respect and application of international law, including the ICJ's ruling in South Africa versus Israel, and the application of the ICC arrest warrants on the war criminals of Netanyahu and Gallant. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to these heroes behind me. Thank you.
I'd like to first introduce Dr. Adla Sokkan. She's an American Syrian physician. She's a practicing pulmonologist in the DC area and a member of Doctors Against Genocide. She's married to Dr. Tariq Haddad, a practicing cardiologist in the DC area who is originally from Hassa. She's here today to testify on behalf of Dr. Haddad's family who have been victims of this ongoing genocide.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Dr. Adla Sokkan. I'm happy to be here to bear witness to what my husband's family has suffered during this ongoing genocide. And I do want to emphasize that it's an ongoing genocide. As recently as the end of October, I unfortunately discovered on behalf of the family by scrolling on X that 11 more children in my husband's family had been killed. It's a tragic way to find out that more of your family has been killed and to have to be the one to deliver that news to your loved one and all of his extended family. But that's just one story. My husband's extended family has now, we've reached over 200 in his family who have been murdered. And when I thought about coming here today, I ironically had to filter through which stories I was going to tell because they are so numerous. And I kept thinking, well, can I just find the right story, the right tragedy to appeal to any of the people around us? Because so many of us up here feel ultimately let down. I have spent more days than I can tell you on Capitol Hill beseeching my elected officials to care. And quite simply, they don't, or they have other interests that outweigh their humanity. And they are choosing to honor those interests rather than their humanity. And so that's why we're here today. I've been let down by my medical associations and the institutions that we supposedly represent. So in thinking about which stories I would tell, I decided to focus on stories that clearly demonstrate that my husband's family's deaths were preventable, as well as demonstrating intent, because the most difficult part of proving genocide is to prove intent. And I want there to be no mistake. My husband's family was intentionally slaughtered. So I'm going to start with the story of his cousin Hani, who in the very beginning of all of this was in the northern part of Gaza City. He, along with his mother, his two sisters, and his Croatian wife, were killed when their family home was bombed. His mother was split into pieces, his sisters as well. He was injured and he died because no one was allowed to approach the home to evacuate him. He died slowly and painfully. It was preventable. Ultimately, the family has yet to be able to find the body of his Croatian wife, Farah, and what was buried were parts of his sisters along with him. During the beginning as well, we had great fear for many of our family members who had small infant children. In particular, one of our cousins had newborn twins. They were just a few months old, and as you can imagine, at this age, they are reliant on their mother's breast milk. With lack of clean water, you can imagine that women become dehydrated and that they are unable to provide adequate breast milk for their young children who have no other means of nutrition. And when you couple that with limited access to clean water to provide an alternative formula, you can imagine the predicament that these women and these young children are in. This is just one story. You could extrapolate that across all of Gaza and across all of these infants, and this is completely and utterly preventable. This was in the time of they will have no water, no food, no access. This was deliberate. I want to tell the story of our family that evacuated from the north as directed in a car caravan along what was deemed a safe route. My husband's cousin, his pregnant wife, and their 6 children were in these cars. Their cars were deliberately bombed. My husband's cousin and all of their children were killed. The only remaining survivor was his pregnant wife. She made it down to Rafah, and she delivered that infant in dire circumstances without proper access to hospital care and care for the newborn infant. And that infant froze to death in a tent on the Rafah border. Sorry. Just this summer, my husband's cousin's son, 14, ventured out on behalf of his family to get bread, because that's what's available. Bread. He was targeted by a drone. He was alone. I also discovered his death on social media as he lay in the street with pita bread surrounding him, bloodstained. The last story I'm going to tell is of some extended relatives. 3 elderly aunts and the extended family, on their own, in part of Gaza City, were approached by the IOF forces at 4:30 in the morning. 2 of the sisters came to the door and were shot on sight. The 3rd sister, wheelchair bound, was shot in the arm and injured. They left her there. She managed to call her family. The family was not allowed to approach the house to evacuate her, to retrieve the bodies of her sisters. We have 3 days of voice recordings of her slowly dying. She ultimately passed away from a preventable injury in the presence of her 2 deceased sisters who had been slaughtered. The family contacted the Israeli forces to let them know, well, now our aunt has died. Can we please retrieve the bodies of our loved ones? They burned the house down. So what was left was her wheelchair. That's it. So if that doesn't demonstrate intent, I don't know what does. This was a genocide months ago. It's a genocide last week. It's a genocide now. And it is utterly preventable, and it needs to stop. And my husband's family is just one family. There are countless stories, and it is my hope that my husband's family did not die in vain, that whomever will die moving forward because this genocide is not over will not die in vain, and that their testimonies and the testimonies of so many other families will be used in The Hague to bring these the people who have perpetrated this genocide to justice. Thanks.
I'd next like to introduce Nurse Lana. She went on a medical mission trip to Gaza 10 months ago. She was one of the first U.S. nurses to take a trip to Gaza on a medical mission during this genocide. She provided care to hundreds of internally displaced Palestinians and tended to the wounded.
Hello, my name is Lana, and I'm not a public speaker. I don't belong in front of a podium. I am a nurse, and I belong at the bedside right now, actually. I'm supposed to be at work. But here I am for the 27th time to tell you about the honor and privilege, as well as the heartbreak of serving as a medical mission nurse in Gaza about 10 months ago. As a nurse, I took an oath to stand by those in need. But what I witnessed in Gaza wasn't just a humanitarian crisis, and it wasn't a war. It was genocide. I witnessed the repercussions of 85,000 tons of bombs dropped on a population of 2 million people the size of Washington, D.C. I stood among a sea of hundreds of thousands of homeless civilians. I saw families that were shredded apart and a landscape reduced to rubble. This is all part of a calculated campaign to erase a people. Israel has murdered 250,000 people within a year. I do want to say, as a witness to Gaza's destruction, the most important voices and testimonies should be from the people of Gaza. They should be the ones standing here to speak their truth. But their voices have been silenced through bombs, through blockades, through oppression, through propaganda, through media bans. So now it's become my moral obligation to speak on their behalf as a witness. Today, there are 0 fully functioning hospitals available in Gaza. 0. Every single hospital has been bombed or cut off from supplies or electricity. I treated patients who arrived in relentless waves, many too far gone to save, and it wasn't because we lacked skill or compassion, but it was because of the level of violence combined with Israel's blockade on aid that collapsed the infrastructure of the healthcare system there. Doctors and nurses were forced to make difficult decisions, choosing which lives to save and which to let go, not because they lacked the will, but because the world allows Israel's inhumane blockade and bombardment to continue. Hospitals already under siege were running on fumes. No supplies, no electricity, no medicine, little to no staff, barely even having the space to grieve, let alone bury their dead. Israel has deliberately killed over 1,000 healthcare workers. Some were even raped and tortured to death. This Holocaust is being live streamed in real time online, and the Israeli forces have no shame in both